We're back for domestic action this weekend as the relentless football schedule shows no signs of affecting our betting experts' ability to pick out winning tips. It was 6 winners, 2 losers and a push in midweek, so we've got the same crew back together to do it all over again. All that and more on today's show. Hello and welcome to the Football Betting Pod, powered by Betting Expert. I'm your host, Daniel Jenkins, joined as ever by Betting Expert's football editor, Sam Ingram. How are you doing, Sam?
Hello, Dan. Very well. How are you?
Good. It feels like we're doing one of these every 3 days for the last month, so I can only appreciate what the players are going through. You know,
exactly. A bit of fatigue creeping in, but if the midweek shows anything to go by, I think we're dealing with it pretty well.
Yeah. No, it's doing good. I think you wanted to say, sorry to change the subject so quickly, but you wanted to talk a little bit. You wanted to appeal to our listeners.
Yeah, I do. So we're getting loads of new followers, lots of new listeners, but we never really hear from anyone. So it's just, most of the time, obviously, it's just us speaking and then on to the next show. So it'd be nice to actually hear from some people. So if you are listening, maybe leave a comment on wherever you'd like to, the podcast platforms, YouTube, Twitter, and just let us know maybe your best bet for the weekend.
Yep.
And then we'll read them out on next week's show and we'll go from there. It'll be really nice to hear from some people because we're getting a fair few good reviews as well. Like I think we're 5-star on Apple and Spotify, so people obviously don't mind listening to us, but it'd be nice to hear from some people.
Yeah, it would be nice to get a bit of feedback, even if it is just winning tips. You just want to brag about winning tips.
Even if it's negative feedback as well, I'm more than interested in reading out a few of those comments. So
yeah,
they are welcome as well.
A lot of regional accents on this show, so I can understand people are critical. Speaking of regional accents, Scott Thornton joining us again. How you doing, man?
Yeah, very good, very good. Recovered from the loser last night, but the other two won comfortably. But to say I was confident with that would be an understatement. But as you say, the game just got choppy, didn't it? And it was it wasn't managed very well by us on the last stages. Yeah. As I turned over to the PSG game, I thought, that's a complete banker with 6 throw-ins in the first 30 minutes, but oh well.
I think Scott's exact words were, I really, really, really like this bet. So yeah, I was expecting at least a winner, but yeah.
As our other guest, Mark Stinchcombe, can attest, Scott spent maybe, 10 minutes after this show had stopped recording, just basically drumming up support for this bet, saying it was the most positive he's ever felt on a bet, I think he said.
And the tackles, in fairness, it was a double, and the tackles did land.
I do, Mark.
Yeah, it's fine. Good bets lose, bad bets win. That's just how it goes sometimes. I'm quite looking forward to this weekend, though, because I actually thought that the Champions League slate this week, I thought was a little bit difficult to land on some bets, whereas the Premier League, we've got 219 games worth of data so far this season. So for me, it's really, really easy to be confident in some of these selections this weekend.
Yeah, let's get right into them then. Sam, do you want to kick us off with your first bet, looking at a game in the Championship?
Yeah, no surprises here. It's Sunderland versus Plymouth Argyle, and I've gone for Sunderland to win 2-0, and that's actually at evens now. It was 1.95 last time I looked, so I'll be quick. Last night, Argyle lost to Burnley 5-0. At home, nothing short of pitiful in that first half. It was 5-0 at half time, and then they managed to shut out Burnley for the other 45 minutes. Morgan Whittaker wasn't in the squad, so it's rumoured that he's likely gone in this transfer window, maybe to Burnley coincidentally. He is Argyle's main goal threat and has often been their saviour in games here and there when they're not creating too much of he usually pops up from maybe 20-30 yards out and often finds the net. I've peddled this stat out a lot on the podcast this season, but Argyle have conjured over 1.0 XG in just one of 14 away matches this season. That was somehow at Bramall Lane against Sheffield United in the only away match they've turned up in a pretty dismal season away from home, and they still lost that game 2-0. With win to nil landing on that occasion too. So yeah, Argyle played last night down in Devon, Wednesday night, and now they travel all the way up to Sunderland for a Saturday kickoff against one of the best teams in the division. So probably don't need to say anything else. Sunderland win to nil at 1.95.
Sam, I've got 2 pet peeves on this show. The first one is the win to nil market, and the second one is you opposing Plymouth. So
yeah, nice.
Why have you done like the win to nil market we've spoken about quite often on this show? It can so easy, one fluky goal, deflected strike can just go in out of nowhere against the run of play. One shot and the bet's over. compared to, say, Asian handicap market, 1x2, just to, it's a lot easier to get it over the line. It's a lot easier for this bet to fail. So why are you doing this?
Well, I know you don't like either win to nil market or me betting on Argyle, so I really wanted to tick them both off in one bet.
Right, okay.
It's simply because how bad Argyle are away from home. I don't really like the win to nil market, especially like the higher up the pyramid you go. There are players in the Championship, and there will be players in this game that can quite easily find a goal from nothing. Usually for Argyle, that's Morgan Whittaker, but like I said, he's not going to be there. And Argyle are just creating little to nothing, especially away from home. Couldn't muster up anything last night, really. And I know there's a new manager in charge now, and I kind of feel for him a little bit because in the Championship at this stage of the season, the fixtures are just relentless. Game after game, Wednesday, Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday. So he's not really had the time on the training pitch to work with these players. And I imagine most of the days he spent at the club with them have been centered around like analysis sessions indoors whilst they're recovering from the fixtures they've played rather than being out on the pitch. And really, regardless of the minutes he spent with the squad, I think this season for Argyle, it just comes down to poor planning and decision-making. Obviously, appointing Wayne Rooney after Ian Foster is unforgivable, really. There was no need to take a risk on Wayne Rooney. There were experienced Championship managers interviewing for that position. The playing staff as a collective aren't good enough for the Championship. Central midfield and fullback areas have been an issue all season. There are strikers leading the line who don't score goals at this level. They saw their best defender in Lewis Gibson a few weeks ago, despite shipping the most goals in the division by a country mile. And I suppose it all boils down to, like, after so many years of getting the key decisions right at Argyle consistently to get into the Championship, the powers that be at Argyle have made a number of blunders in terms of the playing squad, one after the other this season, and it's led to this. Off the pitch, absolutely fantastic, and a much better place financially to safeguard the football club going forward than we were when we come up into the Championship. But on the pitch, it's been almost disastrous, and I just don't see why that changes now away at Sunderland. So I'm going to back win to nil at evens, and I'll probably do it next week. Or maybe I'll just wait until the FA Cup fourth round rolls around and we can take Liverpool minus 7.5 Asian handicap or something daft like that.
I'm gonna run to Sam's defence. So I feel like I've done this quite a few times now, and Dan is running to take you away. So obviously Dan says that there could be a lucky shot deflected that goes in. Well, you have to shoot for that to happen. And Plymouth had 2 shots against Stoke. They're averaging 7.29 shots per away game in the Championship this season. There's not too much chance of a lucky shot going in because they just don't shoot.
And yeah, exactly. The guy who does shoot from 20, 30 yards and occasionally scores is probably not going to be there. So
yeah, well, I couldn't have given you that insight because I haven't treated myself to many Argyle games this year. But yeah, it sounds like a good bet.
Betsy projections for this game give Plymouth 0.71 expected goals, which is pretty low.
Generous.
Sunderland projected to come in at 1.83. So expecting a win to nil, more than likely than not. However, Plymouth plus 1.5 Asian handicap at Sunderland is one of Betsy's best bets for this upcoming weekend.
Argyle.
So, yes.
Plus 1.5.
Plus 1.5. So, I mean, both could be true. 1-0 Sunderland win, everyone goes home happy. But, Sam, if this bet loses, there's going to be a 1-month ban on both Plymouth and the win-to-nil market. Okay? I think that's fair.
That feels fair enough, yeah.
Ingram's first bet of the show is Sunderland to win to nil when they play Plymouth Argyle on the weekend. That's a 1.95 with 1 full unit on it. Scott, over to you for the big game in the Premier League this weekend, Manchester City versus Chelsea.
Yeah, I thought I'd take us somewhere a little bit more familiar. And City, obviously, a crushing 4-2 defeat last night after going 2-0 up. But I think the focus at the weekend will just be on tightening things up and looking to remedy just how open they were at the back. PSG racked up a hell of a lot of shots, and that's something I'm backing against here. We're going to go with under 28.5 shots in the match overall. That's not based on the hunch that City will tighten up. There's data behind it as well, as you'd expect. City are on an upward trajectory in the league, really. They've sort of fixed some of their form. There are some difficult fixtures coming up, and this is case in point, obviously. They can climb into a top 4 place with a win over Chelsea, and I just think we'll see a tactical battle between, obviously, Pep and Maresca, former former colleagues at Manchester City. City home matches this season are averaging 27.7 shots per game, so that's just their league matches. But as you'd imagine, City are getting the lion's share of those shots with 19.1. I don't think City are going to anywhere near that 19.1 here, so 27.7 average is probably a little bit high, albeit it's still below the 28.5 that I'm asking for this bet to win. Chelsea are conceding the fourth fewest shots in the Premier League with an average of 10.91. So again, it all points to City getting lower numbers than we're probably used to them seeing. Chelsea's away matches this season have seen an average of 25.64 shots, but they're also getting the lion's share of those shots with 15.09. Again, you wouldn't really expect them to hit 15 at the Etihad either. So we're hoping for a little bit of a stalemate in phases. Obviously, two very talented teams, and you will get the shots away. So then obviously that leads us on nicely to the head-to-head data. There were just 21 shots when the teams met earlier in the season, and 24 shots the last time they took on City at the Etihad. An average of 24.5 shots in the last 10 head-to-heads, and it all points to under 28.5, looking a rather nice bet here.
Yep, looks good. Betting projections are quite generous in terms of goals, giving Manchester City 2.04 and Chelsea 1.83. The highest projected goal total in a Premier League game this weekend. So are you expecting those shots? Are you expecting few shots, or are you still expecting that number of goals, that volume of goals? Looking at the head-to-head data as well, which you touched upon, Chelsea haven't won. I think they've won one of their last 8 trips to the Etihad, or something like that off the top of my head. It's not been a happy place for Chelsea. So are you expecting goals, and are you expecting Chelsea to maybe get an upset, or just continue with Manchester City's dominance in this fixture?
I think City will probably edge it. Obviously, they're not full of confidence, and that does help our bet here. As you say, Chelsea have been very poor at the Etihad. Their last win was in 2021, I believe, and they haven't scored in 5 of the last 6 visits to the ground. So that probably does play into our hands here. Okay, we've seen goals in this fixture, but generally those games have been at Stamford Bridge. City have put Chelsea to the sword once or twice. That's quite an extended period. They beat them 4-0 in the FA Cup in 2023. I'm just looking at it. And 6-0 in the league back in 2019. Don't think we'll see anything like that here. Chelsea definitely capable of getting on the score sheet, but it's a pretty damning attacking record there. And if you remember the reverse fixture at Stamford Bridge this season, Chelsea did play rather well, but they didn't get on the score sheet, and there were only 21 shots in that game. So I think more of the same in terms of City looking to control, but they're not quite as effective as they have been in the past. I don't expect them to rack up 20 shots by themselves.
No, it's quite an interesting one. Betting markets put the line at around 3.25. As I said, the Betsy projections put the goal line at 3.87, so potentially a way in there if you want to side with Betsy. But you can get Manchester City at even money to win the game, which I think is pretty good. But Scott's first bet of the show is under 28.5 shots when Manchester City take on Chelsea in the Premier League on the weekend as a 1.90. Mark Stinchcombe, over to you, looking at Brighton versus Everton.
Yeah, Brighton 1.66 faves here, which I thought might be a touch short, but I actually decided on a better bet here, I think. So I'm going to be backing over 2.5 goals, which is the underdog, which I'm always happy to do in the Premier League, especially since the beginning of last season with the additional time. And I'm always happy to get involved when it's a Brighton game. Look at this season in the Premier League, average of 3.02 goals per game. That would suggest odds of 1.74, blanket price over 2.5. Last season, the average was 3.28. That would give us a price of 1.58. Put the 2 seasons together, we've got an average of 3.19 goals per game. That would give us a price of 1.63. As soon as we're getting over 2.5 at 1.9, lots to like about it here. I mean, the goal expectancy for this game, based on this odds, is 2.65. So you can see straight away why I would be keen to get it on side. You look at Brighton under Hörsler this season against Premier League opposition, 75 goals in 24 games, average of 3.13 per game. 15 of the last 21 have gone over 2.5 goals. There's a strike rate there of 71%. Obviously, our sample size for Moyes is incredibly small, and we really shouldn't draw any solid conclusions at this stage. But still, 6 goals in his 2 games so far. You compare that versus Dyche's tenure, 40 goals in 19. That's an only average of 2.11 per game. I did have a little look at when Moyes was in charge of Everton previously. Obviously, that was 11 years. I think that's obviously a very high sample size. His games average 2.67 goals, which I think is a decent amount, and it's clearly above the 2.65 that's driving the odds. And obviously, it doesn't take into account Brighton's high average as well. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it's a Brighton game. Brighton are capable of clearing the line by themselves and sort of shown by the fact they won 3-0 at Goodison at the beginning of the season. So, yeah, any time overs is an underdog. I'm always happy to get involved, especially in the Premier League.
Touch upon the projections. The projections are quite low according to Betsy, 2.36. But as you said, that is based on existing data. It's based on previous matches. And I was glad you touched upon the change in approach since David Moyes stepped in, something we talked about a couple of weeks ago on the show. So all of the Betsy projections are based on, almost all of the projections are based on Dyche's Everton's performance, which, as you said, goals are low in Everton games, 9 on average so far this season, lowest in the Premier League in terms of total match goal totals. But are you expecting a response here? Are you expecting Brighton? They've gone 4 games without a win at home, Brighton, which is their longest run in the Premier League since 2022, almost 3 years now. So are you expecting them to maybe come out swinging? And for Everton, they've got a bit of a safety net. They've got 4 points above the drop zone now. So maybe open things up, try and get some results, try and get some points on the board just to open that gap up a little bit more.
Yeah, I think twofold here. I mean, you mentioned Brighton not winning the last 4 at home. That sort of thing doesn't really bother me. They've only lost 4 games all season. I'm really confident in their decision-making process, not just on players, but on managers as well. They're obviously owned by Tony Bloom. He's a very successful gambler. He knows exactly what he's doing. They're coming off the back of 3 straight away wins, obviously winning again at Manchester United. They stuck 4 past Norwich in the Cup as well with a rotated team. So yeah, very, very confident in Brighton. The reason they're not winning home games is they're shipping goals at the back, which is great for my bet anyway. And then in terms of Everton, I think Moyes, you're right, he's got to come out swinging a little bit. I think he's got a little bit of a point to prove. He's got a section of the fan base to appease. And you mentioned about the projections there. They're very, very low. Even under Dyche, Everton were massively underperforming the expected goals at both ends of the pitch. XG under Dyche was 2.8. Compare that against just 2.11. And that was, both ends, poor finishing. And we know they massively overperformed defensively. I mean, those 3 results over Christmas where they picked up draws against Arsenal, Chelsea and City all in a row is just, that's not sustainable essentially. So, yeah, I just think massively loads in our favour here. And I would still back over 2.5 if it was probably 1.8. And the fact that it's underdog, really just such an easy decision to take on.
Mark touched upon it there, but Moyes' last season in charge of Everton, obviously before he left for Manchester United, was the highest XG Everton have had in the Premier League season in the last 15 years. So it does say a lot in the way of their approach under Moyes. And they had a 1.95 XG against Spurs last week. And you think that could have been a lot higher if they didn't have such a commanding lead at halftime. Obviously, at 3-0, you show a lot less attacking intent. So 1.64 of that XG was racked up in the first half. So I think Everton will show plenty of intent here. I don't expect them to take a 3-0 lead at Brighton, but even if they did, Mark's bet's in anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. No prizes, it doesn't take a genius to see what Everton's problem was in Sean Dyche's last 6 away games in charge of Everton in the Premier League. They scored just 1 goal. So certainly need to change that here. Mark Stinchcombe's first bet of the show is over 2.5 goals in Brighton versus Everton. That's a 1.90. Sam, back over to you, sticking in the Premier League with Southampton versus Newcastle.
Going for Newcastle minus 1.25 Asian handicap at 1.87. So Newcastle were on a 9-game winning streak going into Bournemouth at home on the weekend. And I think that's important to remember here from a betting point of view with the 4-1 Bournemouth defeat likely ringing around our minds when approaching this game. Like Bournemouth in that game were the better team, but they have been against most Premier League opponents this season. We know their underlying processes are almost league leading. I think maybe 3rd highest XG total, still more than Man City and Arsenal. So should be no surprise that they have a result like that in them and that Newcastle fell foul to it. And that's taking nothing away from Bournemouth either, because they're missing key players, a lot of them, and they cut through Newcastle at times like they weren't even there. But if there's one side in the Premier League you want to face after a result like that, other than Leicester City, I think it's probably Southampton. And it's a Southampton team now without Tyler Diblin, which is which is big news for me and big news for Southampton, really. It was confirmed at the start of the week that he'll be out for 4 to 6 weeks. And that's such a big blow to that team, because if there was one player you had any hope in at all to get the ball, grab his side by the scruff of the neck and take them upfield, then it's definitely Tyler Diblin at 18 years old, which just goes to show what a prospect he is. And it goes to show why there are so many clubs sniffing around him right now. I saw that Tottenham, maybe RB Leipzig as well, were looking at him. So he's definitely a man in demand. So big blow for Southampton, their biggest, brightest attacking spark removed from a team that has registered 22.4 XG in 22 games. And they did score twice last time out against Forest in Nottingham, but I think that was more because Forest maybe took their foot off the gas and lost a little bit of concentration more than anything. They were 3-0 up, and sometimes that happens. If we're going to compare Newcastle and Forest, I really expect Newcastle to match Forest in terms of getting some joy on the counter-attack through the likes of Isak and Gordon. And I guess as well, they'll be presented with a chance or two from a targeted press of that Southampton back line, just like Forest scored from at the weekend, and just like plenty of others have profited from this campaign. So in terms of a matchup, I see it quite similar to Forest and Southampton on the weekend, and I would be surprised if Newcastle don't score a couple of goals at least.
Yeah, Betsy projecting Newcastle to score 2.18 with 1.13 for Southampton, which is quite interesting, although they have found the net quite a few times in the last few games. We know what Southampton are. I don't want to talk about them too much. They're a weak side that have been weakened by injury. That loss of Dibbling is going to be huge for them, Sam, as you said. But looking at Newcastle, Eddie Howe's Newcastle are really strange side, aren't they? They're very streaky. Like, they've won 6 of the last 7. They won 6 straight Premier League matches going into that Bournemouth game. They've won 2. They'd won 2 of 12 before that run. I'm not sure what it is about Newcastle. Are you expecting them to go on another streak? Maybe was that Bournemouth game a bit of a one-off? It was such a strange performance because we saw players who had been in fantastic form just making really basic mistakes. Anthony Gordon just giving the ball away left, right and centre. Bournemouth, for all their credit, looked fantastic. But are you expecting a bit more of that from Newcastle, or are you expecting them to get that game to be a one-off and they get right back on the horse and maybe start winning some more matches?
In terms of betting on Newcastle here, that Bournemouth game is probably done this bet the world of good, because now that might have just maybe given them a jolt that they needed to now really push on and continue in that kind of rich vein of form. And sometimes, teams do have a bad day at the office, and I think it was very much that. Like you said, there are a few unforced errors that we don't usually see from Newcastle, or we haven't seen in the last few months. So going away to Southampton, I would expect all week on the training pitch, Eddie Howe and his backroom staff would have obviously overanalyzed that Southampton game and kind of dug into every little the Bournemouth game, and dug into every little detail, and they'll come to Southampton raring to go. And it's a Southampton team that have conceded 52.64 XG in 22 matches, which is appalling. So the kind of form that Isak and Gordon are in, bar that Bournemouth game, I would probably have to line at minus 1.5 Asian handicap, even with Southampton at home at St Mary's, because they failed to score in 5 out of 10 home games. They've kept the clean sheet in 1 of 10, so I'm not sure how much advantage can be factored in from home advantage. Southampton are the worst home side in the division according to points returned. At home, they've conceded the most goals, scored the least, and returned the fewest points. So, yeah, not great at home for Southampton, and Newcastle have won each of the last 4 away games. So do Southampton lay a glove on Newcastle? Maybe, but I would imagine Newcastle score maybe 2 or 3. And maybe even without reply, as we've seen from Southampton in 50% of their home games this season.
Yeah, just the one win at home for Southampton this season, 1-0 over Sean Dyche's Everton back at the start of November. Since then, 5 home games played, 19 goals conceded. Admittedly, Liverpool and Chelsea were 2 of those fixtures, but conceded 5 at home to Brentford, 5 at home to Spurs. It's not looking good for them. Sam's second bet is Newcastle minus 1.25 when they take on Southampton at St Mary's in the Asian handicap market. That's a 1.87 with the full unit on that. Mark, back over to you for Fulham versus Manchester United.
Yeah, who'd have thought at the beginning of the season we'd be coming into this game with Fulham at 2.3 faves against United. I mean, even during this poor, what are we on, 11th year without Ferguson, United have still sort of at least been going off faves in these games. But yeah, massive underdogs. With which is no surprise, obviously, for anybody that watches football. But I'm not going there. Again, another easy bet for me here. I'm going to back over 2.5 goals at 1.8. Craven Cottage has been an absolute sanctuary for goals since the beginning of last season. 86 scored in just 29 games, an average of 2.97 per game. The goal expectancy for this match is 2.75. 73% of Fulham home games have gone overs this season. We look longer term, it's 17 of their last 24. That's 71%. That's equivalent to a price of 1.4. And then under Amorim, 10 of his 15 so far have gone over 2.5 goals. It's been sort of healthy at both ends. They've scored 24 under him. They've conceded 28. It's just been carnage, really. 52 goals is an average of 3.47 per game. That's nearly 3.5, and we're talking about a goal line of 2.5. 3.47 per game would equate to odds of 1.49 on over 2.5. And yeah, generally, when these two meet, there is goals. Since Fulham returned to the Premier League in 2018, 7 of their 10 meetings have gone over 2.5. So yeah, another really easy bet for me, unless all of a sudden that United defence is tightened up overnight. But given they have to go and play Rangers Thursday, I think Sam mentioned it before, new managers just aren't getting much time on the training ground at the moment.
Yeah, it's something Ruben Amorim has complained about quite a few times. It is short stint in charge of Manchester United. Betting projections for this game put the goal line at 2.55 with 1.36 for Fulham and 1.19 for Manchester United. I feel like that's leaning a little bit too much on Manchester United's record and not so much on Fulham. So you touched upon the goals there at Craven Cottage, 3.18 on average total match goal total for Fulham's games at home this season. So it's looking good. If I had to push you a little bit for a winner, are you expecting Fulham to live up to their favourite status and get the 3 points here?
I would probably back a draw in the grand scheme of things, because I think Fulham, they've only lost 5 games this season, but they've only won 8, so they've actually drawn 9. They've been quite competitive in the bigger games. They got a draw away at Anfield, they got a draw at home to Arsenal, draw at home against Spurs. They were very unlucky to be defeated before City went on this run. I would probably go with a draw. Fulham have been, as you would imagine, they've been a bit profligate in front of goal. They don't have, I would say, perhaps very above average finishers at the club. And they could be even higher than their position. So yeah, probably maybe a 2-2 draw.
4 straight draws at home for Fulham in the Premier League. So if you fancy that as a little slightly longer shot, you can back a draw at 3.40, getting into Juventus territories. Fulham. Mark Stinchcombe's second bet is over 2.5 goals in Fulham versus Manchester United. That's a 1.80. Scott, round us off for the singles with Crystal Palace versus Brentford.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting game, this one. I feel like Brentford grabbed a lot of the headlines start of the season, particularly for their home form. They were doing better than Liverpool at home at one stage. They faltered in recent weeks. I say recent weeks, over the last sort of 6-7 weeks, they've really started to falter. 1 win in their last 9 competitive matches, which is obviously very, very poor. Ironically, that was their first away win of the season as they beat Southampton 5-0, but Sam has already given us a lot of detail on why the Saints are absolutely rubbish, so we don't have to worry about that one too much. But I'm actually backing both teams to score and over 10.5 shots for Crystal Palace. It'll come as no surprise that with Brentford losing so many away games this season, they're conceding a hell of a lot of shots. Last week, they were home. They conceded 37 against Liverpool. That means they're now conceding the most shots on average in the Premier League. Their average for their opponents is just below 19. So I thought I'd just take a look at the away data so it's not skewed by that incredible 37 shots that Liverpool racked up. And in away games, Brentford are conceding an average 21.4 shots per game. Southampton are actually the only side not to have at least 18 shots against them. So well above the over 10.5 required here. And the other part of this bet is both teams to score. So they're facing a Palace side that are unbeaten in recent outings. So since before Christmas, I think their last defeat was on the 21st of December. They're on the back of 2-0 wins in the league. But they've shown some frailty at home. Both teams have scored in their last 5 outings at Selhurst Park. There's been no clean sheet in front of their own fans since October as well. So I really do fancy Brentford again on the score sheet. Despite their woes on the road, which are well documented, the Bees have scored in 8 of their 10 Premier League away games, and both teams have scored in the last 5 head-to-heads between the sides. So it really does lend itself nicely to goals, and I just think Palace will rack up the shots in the process.
Yeah, it looks good. We've talked about Brentford quite a few times with their home and away records. Away, touch upon the number of shots they've conceded there, Scott, and how few they conceded at Southampton. That was broke their duck with their first win away from home in the Premier League all season long. They've scored 11 goals away from home. 5 of them came in that match. And looking at Crystal Palace, they're a team in form, aren't they? So are you expecting Brentford to come back to what we were seeing earlier in the season with that night and day home and away form? And Palace, new lease of life. What is it? 1 defeat in 11 Premier League games, 1 loss since the start of November. They're doing well, aren't they?
Yeah, I think Palace's sort of resurgence has been really good to watch. I think we all enjoyed it when Glasner came in last year, and the early part of this season really looked as though he may pay with his job at some stage, because they really were in a relegation battle you just didn't expect. Obviously, they lost Elisa in the summer, which was massive. So it's quite nice to see them doing well again. I just think Brentford are capable of getting on the score sheet. We should see some sort of response. Obviously, they just dug in basically last week and tried to hold on against Liverpool. They should offer a lot more here. And as I say, they have scored in a decent number of away games as well. And the head-to-head record just adds to the promise. And Palace's inability to keep a clean sheet despite the good form at Selhurst Park. So yeah, it does point towards both teams scoring. And these teams are pretty closely matched, I think we'd all say. So it'd be interesting to see the Betsy predictions for that one.
Yeah, Brentford played Arsenal, City and Liverpool in their last 4 matches, with Southampton being the only other one. So tricky run for them. Betsy projections, you said, Scott, Palace are projected 1.69 with Brentford 1.32. So certainly going along with both teams to score maybe over 2.5 goals as well, if you want to throw that in, boost those odds a little bit more. But Scott's bet is both teams to score and over 10.5 shots for Crystal Palace. That's a 1.70 with a full unit on that. Let's get on with this week's Pod Treble, and a bit of a traffic light in midweek with 1 win, 1 loss, 1 draw. Scott, we've already touched upon your throw-ins bet, so redeem yourself, please, with your submission to the Pod Treble.
Yeah, so I've gone back in on throw-ins purely just because I find this one of my favourite markets. And I really want to get a winner here. Yeah, so we're back in over 28.5 throw-ins at Aston Villa versus West Ham. This was actually Potter's first game in charge of West Ham. He's only had 3 games in charge. And there were 31 throws in that game. Sorry, it was a cup clash. 18 of those throw-ins came in the first half. It was quite frantic at first. Should probably hit the higher count, to be honest. It's settled. Villa home matches have seen an average of 26.64. So I can understand the line, but I do think that will be exceeded here. There were 34 throws in Villa's last home game against Leicester. And the 30 throws or more has landed in Potter's 3 games in charge of West Ham, as they look to sort of be aggressive without the ball and really change their approach. There were 33 throws when the teams met earlier in the season, and over 28.5 throws has landed in 9 of the last 10 head-to-heads. So those games have seen an average of 34.5 throw-ins. So 28.5 is a little on the low side here. So I'm putting that as my bet for the treble.
Yeah, fingers crossed. It's a weird feeling cheering on low throws in a match, but yeah, let's hope Scott's redemption can come in this game. Mark Stinchcombe, give us your submission to the Pod Treble, please.
I'm going to back Forest to avoid defeat away at Bournemouth at 1.775. This is 7th hosting 3rd in the Premier League. At the home side is 2.05, and I don't think it's often this season you can say that you can get the team that's 3rd in the Premier League to avoid defeat to a sort of a non-Big 6 team at these prices. I mean, if they were equal in ability, Bournemouth would be 2.25, yet Forest are 7 points clear. So I'm happy at worst to say that they're equal in ability. So that for me makes Bournemouth too short. Forest have lost just 4 games all season. That's the 3rd best record in the league. Only 2 have come away from home. And that was against Arsenal and Man City, so no shame there at all. Bournemouth themselves have only won 10 of 22 games. So that's only 45% of the victories this season, and they are the 3rd biggest underachievers in the league based on expected goals for. They've scored 36, but they've created an XG of 46. But I think after 22 games, I think we have to accept it's no longer bad luck / great goalkeeping, and actually poor finishing. And if you actually look at the 2 teams that are the biggest underachievers in this metric, it's Crystal Palace and Southampton. who are obviously down in the bottom half. So I think it's no surprise that after this stage, you can't keep saying that these chances will get converted into goals. And actually, how many great chances are they going to be able to make against a Forest side that have got the fourth best defence in terms of expected goals against, and actually the third best defence overall? And then at the other end of the pitch, when we're talking about finishing, obviously Forest have got the league's fourth top scorer in Chris Wood, who's got 14 goals from less than 10 expected. So he is clearly a good finisher. So I think that could be the difference in the game. And actually, if you look after Spurs, Bournemouth got the most amount of players missing with 10. And in Evan Nielsen, Ines Unal, Tavernier and Sinistera, that's 15 goals and assists between the seasons. That's a big, big chunk missing. So, yeah, I'm happy to oppose Bournemouth at these short odds.
Yeah, we do often see after a big result like Bournemouth got against Newcastle, we do often see teams just sort of drop off a little bit, and maybe those injuries will catch up with them. We'll see. Sam, close us off with the treble. Give us a bit of continental flair to what has been a really British episode.
Yes, I'm taking the treble to Ligue. We're going overseas, but it is on Friday night, and I promised myself I wouldn't go early again, but yeah, here we are. So I'm going Argyle versus Saint Etienne, and Saint Etienne plus 0.5 Asian handicap at 1.92. So they've just got in a new manager. Eric Hornland has arrived at St. Etienne just before the winter break, and he's made a bit of an impression. Over in Norway, he oversaw a 2.55 goals per 90 scored average after 136 matches at Brann in Norway. And in his opening game versus Rans, St. Etienne scored 3 goals to kickstart his tenure, and that is significant because they'd only scored 12 goals in 15 games previously. Then the new manager comes in and they raced to a 3-1 win in the first game and after the winter break. If you dig into Hornland's comments in the media, like, I'll be honest, I've never heard of him until he's rocked up at St. Etienne. But if you look into some of the stuff he's been saying, he said, we want a clear identity. For me, it's primarily about creating numerical superiority offensively. I want to bring many players into the opposition's box. That's what people want to see. We also want to create game plans to showcase the players and their creativity, which sounds great. And I know Argyle's new manager said something similar a few weeks back, and they lost 5-0 last night. But still, St. Etienne have performed well this side of the festive schedule. They lost 2-1 to PSG, but they had a couple of chances nearer the start of the game to make that scoreline even more respectable. I know PSG had many more chances too, but still, they performed well. They drew 1-1 to Nantes on the weekend, but commanded 75% possession and dominated the game as they looked and pushed for an equaliser. And overall, I've landed on this handicap because I think it's wrong, and I think it is priced off going off of the season as a whole, rather than maybe this St. Etienne side under Hornland. So if you look at the underlying data, they are the worst underlying side in both the attacking expected goals metrics and the worst defensively in Ligue 1, rock bottom of both. So these kind of prices could be here to stay for a while if the bookmakers don't really catch on to what's going on over in St. Etienne.
Yeah, Betsy Data agrees with the bookies for this game, but as you said, that's based on existing stuff. Maybe a new manager brings in a new style of play, new level of performance for St. Etienne. So a bit disappointed that you've gone for the early kickoff again, but no, it looks a good selection. Looks a good selection. If you put all three of those bets together into a treble, you get odds of 6.07, which is one of our longer trebles for the pod, which we'll be backing with a quarter of a unit. So let's recap the bets, starting with Scott Thornton's 2 singles, please.
Yeah, so I'll be back in under 28.5 shots in Manchester City versus Chelsea, and that's priced at 1.9. And then Crystal Palace versus Brentford, both teams to score, and over 10.5 shots for Crystal Palace at 1.7, and we'll take a unit on both.
And Mark Stinchcombe?
Yeah, I'm looking at Brighton versus Everton, over 2.5 goals at 1.9. And then on Sunday, late kickoff on Sunday, Fulham versus Man United, also over 2.5 goals at 1.8.
And Sam Ingram gives you 2 singles, and if you are backing the treble pick as a single, please give us that as well.
Sunderland win 0 against Plymouth Argyle on Saturday. That's at evens. And also Newcastle minus 1.25 Asian handicap at 1.87. And St. Etienne plus 0.5 Asian handicap at 1.92. All 3 of them for 1 unit each.
Good stuff. So Sam's final bet of the 3 days going into this week's pod treble alongside Scott's over 28.5 throws in Aston Villa versus West Ham. It's 1.80. And Mark Stinchcombe's Forest plus 0.5 versus Bournemouth in the Asian handicap market at 1.775. Pod Treble is being tracked at 6.07 for a quarter of a unit. If you are going to be using any of the bets from today's show, then please gamble responsibly, only betting what you can afford to lose. Thank you very much to Mark Stinchcombe.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Scott Thornton.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam Ingram.
Cheers, Dan.
And thank you for me. We'll be back next week for a Champions League Match Day 8 preview.